Ismaila Diagne is going to fill Gonzaga's final scholarship spot. What does he bring to Mark Few and the Gonzaga Bulldogs?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Monday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster, and they do it for free. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Well, folks, I typically record Mailbag Monday episodes sometime on Sunday afternoon, evening. It was Father's Day. My first Father's Day this weekend. My dad was in town, had an opportunity to go to a baseball game, hang out, celebrate the day, decided, you know what? I'm going to push Locked On Zags to Monday morning. Not something I do very often, but I am glad that I did. It worked out in this situation as Ismaila Diagne, the 17-year-old 7-foot center from Real Madrid, announced his commitment officially to the Gonzaga Bulldogs at about 7:30 in the morning Pacific time on Monday. So we get the opportunity to talk about that on today's show. We'll talk about who he is, what he brings to the team, the scholarship spots all being filled for Gonzaga. We'll talk about Isiah Harwell, who has announced his top 4. It does include Gonzaga. It does not include North Carolina. Why that's a big deal. We're also going to answer some mailbag questions. We're not going to get to every mailbag question that was answered. So if you ask questions, particularly if you ask questions about private equity in college athletics, or if you ask questions about naming rights to the Big 12 and all the situations there, I have saved those questions, packaged them up. We're going to get to them on either Tuesday or Wednesday of this week, depending on any other news that breaks. But for now, we're going to start the conversation talking about Ismaila Diagne. And there was an inkling that this was going to happen. Not only did we talk about it, I think not even last week, I think it was the week before that when we started to hear the rumors that Deani was kind of being considered for that final scholarship spot for Gonzaga. They had 12 of their 13 spots filled. We're in an era where we're not seeing a lot of teams opt to even fill all 13 of their scholarships. A lot of programs are feeling like, well, we're just filling these spots for guys who are going to eventually hit the transfer portal. It just doesn't seem necessary to have, all these spots filled. Whereas Gonzaga has gone in the opposite direction, as they so often do. It's cheesy to say, but they do sometimes zag when everybody else zigs, and they find alternate ways to kind of build rosters and add talent in ways that other programs have not always been able to do. That's part of the reason they've been on the cutting edge of college basketball, and part of the reason they've been so successful for the last 25 years. And we see Gonzaga add a scholarship spot for Braden Smith, who's going to redshirt next year. We see them have a scholarship spot for Emmanuel Inocente, who's probably going to play very little this year, but is a future piece for Gonzaga. And now they use their final scholarship spot on a 17-year-old young man from Real Madrid, who is probably not going to be a big player in year one for this Gonzaga team. A little bit about Ismaila Diagne. As we said, he plays for Real Madrid. For their U18 team at the Adidas Next Generation Tournament, Deani averaged 10.2 points, 7.8 rebounds, 1.6 assists. He also played in 4 games for them in the Pop Gorica tournament, averaging very similar 11 points, 7.8 rebounds in those 4 games. So he's done a lot of work with Real Madrid's youth leagues. They do things differently over in Europe than they do in the United States, and they have these professional sports teams that have these youth leagues, and you can kind of come up through that way. They do it a lot in soccer, and they have brought that to the United States for soccer, but it hasn't really translated to that kind of work in the basketball sphere. But for Deani, he's been with Real Madrid for a long time. He's initially from Senegal, but he has been playing with Real Madrid and their youth levels for quite a long time. This last year, he made his debut with the national team in the ACB, a very premier league to be playing basketball in, especially as a 17-year-old. He played about 12 and a half minutes per game. Again, not huge minutes, but he was one of the youngest players to ever play at this level. I think legitimately him and Luka Doncic are 2 of the youngest players to play professionally at this level. So that is a really good sign of his potential development. 12 and a half minutes per game, average about 5 points, 4.5 boards, and 1 block. He's 7 feet tall. He's long. He's rangy. There is projection for him to be a shot blocker. So for the people who have been reaching out, who have been concerned, who have talked about this on my messages, my DMs, my YouTube comments, when is Gonzaga going to add a rim protector? Why aren't they filling that fine, et cetera, et cetera? This is your guy. He is a young, rangy, rim protecting type big. This is what many people exactly wanted out of that final scholarship spot. And he's not going to play much in year one. For starters, he's 17 years old. Most guys who come internationally to the United States don't succeed right away. It is rare to see players come across the ocean and play in Spokane for Gonzaga and immediately succeed. Even the guys who were great, Joe Eliai redshirted as a freshman. Killian Tilly is a very rare example of somebody who contributed right away as a freshman, but he still got much better throughout his career. Shemek Karnowski was a bit player as a freshman. Like, it is unusual for players to come over and succeed immediately. Domantas Sabonis did, but he also grew up in Portland and had a bit of a different experience than a lot of the other guys do. So for Deani, this makes a ton of sense. You bring him over now. He plays in a very small role as your fourth big, probably gets very few minutes per game, probably gets a lot of DNPs because you have Graham Ike starting at center. You have Ben Gregg starting at the 4. You have Braden Huff as your backup center. Michael Ajayi is going to play a ton of minutes at the 4. That fills up pretty much all the minutes there. Deani will get some, he'll play like Pavle Stosic minutes. Like, I genuinely think it's going to look kind of like that. But he is a much better, for lack of a better word, no offense to Pavle, but he's a better developmental piece long-term and more likely to be a big impact guy as soon as year 2. And that's what I love about what Gonzaga has done. They're filling their scholarship spots very intentionally. Braden Smith is here to be a piece in the future. Emmanuel Inocente is here to be a piece in the future. Now, so is Ismaila Diagne. You have those 3 guys. You have Braden Huff. You have Dusty Stromer. That's a core 5 that you can take with you into the 25-26 season after this year when Ben Gregg is gone, when Ryan Nembhard and Nolan Hickman are gone, when Michael Ajayi is gone, when the expectation is that Graham Ike will be gone. He could come back. We don't know for sure that he will be gone. But having somebody like Deani puts you in a position to be far more comfortable with that potential departure if it does happen. We're going to talk a lot more about Deani. We're going to get more into who he is, what he brings to this team, try to get some guests on who've maybe seen him play internationally. But right now, I do want to move on and talk about another big storyline that hit over the weekend. Speaking of future Gonzaga contributors, Isiah Harwell, who's been a long-time target for Gonzaga in the class of 2025. Talked about him later last week with Tobias Bass of The Athletic. Talked about him when the Rivalry rankings came out. We've talked about him quite a bit. He visited Gonzaga in February, 6'6" combo guard he plays at Wasatch Academy in Mount Pleasant, Utah right now. He's from Pocatello, Idaho, and he re-released his top list. He had a top 9 previously. He has cut it down to 4. Gonzaga's on that list alongside Cal, alongside Houston, alongside Texas. Who is not on that list is North Carolina. Many people felt like North Carolina was the biggest challenger to Gonzaga for Isiah Harwell's services. He's no longer considering North Carolina. I think his dad had a quote talking about how North Carolina is the dream school. A lot of North Carolina fans got very excited. This is where he's going. It's his dream school. Of course, he's going to come to North Carolina. Why wouldn't he? Et cetera, et cetera. He's not. He's either going to Gonzaga, Cal, Houston, or Texas. He has family connections at Cal. In fact, On3 currently has Gonzaga as the favorite to land Isiah Harwell, but Cal is right on their tail. He's scheduling a visit right there. As I'm recording right now, I believe the visit is coming up very soon, if not just happened. I'm not sure exactly, but On3, which I don't always take their percentages as gospel. I wouldn't suggest doing that, but On3 has Harwell as 32% chance Gonzaga, 28% Cal. So it feels like it's kind of coming down to those 2 programs right now. He's, again, a consensus top 10 prospect in the 2025 class. He's 8th at Rivals, 5th at On3, 7th at 24/7 Sports, 10th at ESPN. It was in a live stream with Nolan Hickman very recently. They were chatting with each other. People were asking Harwell if he's coming to Gonzaga. Like, he has been really deeply connected to this program for a long time. He did his official visit in February. This is the player to keep a close eye on because it really feels like we're getting close to a commitment. And in fact, he said in his recent interview after announcing his top 4 that he is planning to commit on September 12th. So he's still got 2 months, a little less than two months, but that could cap off an incredible offseason for Gonzaga. It's also 3 months till September. I got my math a little bit off. Regardless, this has been an incredible offseason already, filling all the scholarship spots, adding future additions. The recruiting, high school recruiting, has been the one area that we haven't seen a lot. We've seen a lot of good names that Gonzaga is considering in 25. Harwell, Jalen Harrelson, Nick Kaminia, Davis Fogel. Fogel's going to be on campus in a couple weeks. Harrelson is allegedly planning a visit. Nick Kaminia has been on campus multiple times. Harwell's been on campus. If Harwell commits on September 12th, and they get one of the other guys, Vogel or Kamenia or Harrelson. Harrelson seems the least likely, but if they get two guys out of this class to top off the offseason, man, that is be Mark Few working his magic in a way that we've almost never seen before. Really great stuff with Deani coming in. I know he doesn't really, he does count as a 2024 prospect. So that's the first 2024 incoming freshman the Zags have on the roster, and potentially looking at Harwell coming in as well. Really nice stuff for Mark Few right now. Well, folks, we're going to talk Mailbag Monday now, because that was the plan for the show before the Deani news. We're talking about how Gonzaga will fare in their non-conference schedule next season. We're going to discuss that and more coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you all about today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster, and they do it for free. And LinkedIn is not just another generic job board. They help you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. And in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, folks, you're not looking in the right place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is also constantly finding ways to make this process even easier, including launching a feature that helps you write your own job descriptions, making that process much quicker. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, segment 2, still Eddie Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are moving into the Mailbag Monday portion of today's show. Again, handful of you have asked questions that we're not going to be able to get to on today's show because we ended up having that full segment on Deani and Isiah Harwell. So if you asked a question, you don't hear it answered, wait for later in the week. We are going to get to them then. This question here comes from Pete22909 on Discord, who says, what is your prediction about the number of Gonzaga conference and non-conference wins this season? Does Gonzaga have a realistic chance of upsetting UConn in Madison Square Garden? With Ajayi and Battle expected to be playing key roles, how long do you think it will be for the team to be running at peak performance and efficiency? All right, we'll take these one by one. First answer, it's hard to say without knowing the full schedule. Talked about that on, I believe, Thursday's show, whether they're going to fill those final 5 games with bye games, whether they're going to add another marquee game, what that might look like, etc. I see a tough schedule for Gonzaga. Obviously, they got UConn, they got San Diego State, they have Kentucky, they have UCLA, they got the Battle for Atlantis games. I see 2, maybe 3 losses in there, but again, it's hard to say. Not even all those rosters are finalized at this point. There's still player movement to be done. We don't know all of the games, but I would expect two, I think, is a reasonable, like, best case expectation for Gonzaga. Maybe not best case. They could do better than that, but I would think 1 to 2 losses is feasible in the non-conference. 3 is kind of the quote unquote worst case scenario. In conference play, always tough to beat St. Mary's and Moraga, although Gonzaga did it last year. I think there's some other teams that are going to step up. Santa Clara is going to be very good. I think there's going to be some challenges, but I wouldn't be surprised if Gonzaga gets through the conference slate with 1 loss. So I would think Gonzaga could be going into the NCAA tournament with 3, maybe 4 losses total this season. Could Gonzaga upset UConn at Madison Square Garden? Yeah, absolutely. They could. People thought UConn's roster last year wasn't good enough to repeat as national champions, and they did. So I think we should be cautious of saying, well, this team's clearly not going to do it for a 3rd year in a row. But I don't think the talent on this team is nearly as comparable as previous years. The depth options that they have who are stepping into bigger roles are good. I like Solomon Ball. I like Jalen Stewart. He's a Seattle kid. I like Samson Johnson stepping into a bigger role. I'm not super confident in Aiden Mahaney's ability to be an impact player for that program the way that Cam Spencer was last year. I think Liam McNeely's a really good freshman, but he doesn't fill the same role as Stephon Castle. So I'm curious how the pieces will fit together for UConn. I think Gonzaga's got a real chance of winning that one, even if it's a pseudo road game for them. And in terms of Ajayi and Battle, I think it won't be as painful as it was last year because they're not having to get new players in at point guard and at center, which are the 2 valuable positions for Gonzaga in terms of needing somebody in that role who knows the offense, who understands what Gonzaga is trying to do. And it took Nembhard and Ike a little bit of time to find that last year, and them not finding their spot kind of caused the whole rest of the team to not quite be comfortable in their roles. Because Nembhard and Ike are back and they are comfortable in their roles, I think everybody else will assimilate a bit more quickly. Battle's going to be a microwave microwave scorer off the bench. I just don't think that it's going to take him that long to adjust to that role, because that's the role he's filled for the large majority of his college basketball career. Ajayi, maybe it takes him a little bit of time to adjust, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if those two guys are kind of adjusted pretty early in the season, and Gonzaga is a well-oiled machine by late November, early December, somewhere in there. Next question comes from Shelly Rito 7 on Discord, who says, what is your personal favorite season of Gonzaga basketball? For me, this past season was one of my favorites, solely based off the amazing growth throughout the season from the team perspective and individual performances. Yeah, it was a really fun season last year. It was a stressful season as a daily content creator for Gonzaga basketball. And I think I'm going to forever, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, be clouded by that perception. It was harder to see the full picture last year because I was being inundated with a lot of concern from fans and frustration from fans in my mentions on my YouTube comments that kind of soured the experience of last year's growth. I expected they were going to get better throughout the year, and I was constantly optimistic on the show, but sometimes people who want to wallow in self-pity about Gonzaga don't really like when you're optimistic about the team. So I experienced a fair amount of vitriol because of that, and so it kind of soured the experience of last year. To answer the question, 2012, 2013, is probably my favorite year for Gonzaga basketball. I was a senior at Gonzaga. I was on the Kennel Club board. I was sitting front row at every single game. I was leading the cheers during the games. It was Gonzaga's first year ever being ranked number one. They got one home game as the number one team against Portland to close out the season. It was senior night. It was an incredible experience. It was their first time being a number one seed in the NCAA tournament. Obviously, it ended early, unfortunately, with that loss to Wichita State. But Kelly Olynyk that year was magnificent. The growth of Kevin Pangos and Gary Bell. Elias Harris was one of my favorite Zags, to see him kind of have that great year. Mike Hart stepping into the starting lineup and being a starting small forward for the number one team in the country after being a guy who just happened to be on campus and walked onto the team is a great story. Like, there's a lot of great stories for that Gonzaga team, and I think that they will always have a special place in my heart because of that. Also love the 2020-21 team. Hard to not pick against them. Team that was undefeated until the national championship game. Jalen Suggs was a revelation to watch on the court. It was also one of my first years really digging into covering Gonzaga full time. I was still with the Zags Score podcast. I started at Locked On right before the next season, but getting to cover that team and podcast about that team and talk about them and watch all of their games was a really fun experience as well. Next question comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, with it being Father's Day weekend, if you could make a Father's Day wish for something great to happen to Gonzaga during the 24-25 season, other than the easy answers of going to the Final Four, winning the title, what would you wish for? Well, I don't know if this counts because it's not really during the season, but I think for Gonzaga, one of the best things that could happen in the next year-ish is committing at least 3 of the 4 top options they're looking at in that 2025 recruiting class. So you're looking at Isiah Harwell, Jalen Harrelson, Davis Fogel, and Nick Kaminia. A great result for Gonzaga's 3 of those guys. And it's probably the 3 that aren't Jalen Harrelson. Fogel, Kaminia, Harwell. Harwell's committing September 12th. Fogel's coming to campus in a week and a half. And Kaminia has been on campus multiple times. If they can get 3 of those 4 guys, that is a huge end of the offseason for Gonzaga. But if we don't count that as something that happens in the 24-25 season, I will give a couple other options. Beating UConn at Madison Square Garden would be an amazing opportunity to take on the back-to-back defending champs and take them down, take down Aiden Mahaney on his new school. Really fun opportunity if they win that game. Sweeping St. Mary's, always pick that. I think it's a little bit more feasible this year because I'm just not super confident in St. Mary's. Then having said that, they bring back Mitchell Saxon, they bring back Augustus Marcelonis. They're still going to be a quality program, and they're always going to be competitive against Gonzaga. So sweeping them, always on the list. Winning the battle for Atlantis, any of those 3. Beating UConn, sweeping St. Mary's, winning the battle for Atlantis. You can pick one of those. I'd be content with any of them. Always fun to win those MTE tournaments as well. Well, folks, the Olympics are coming up, and we have some fun discussing what Zags participating in various events might look like. All that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, it is playoff time, finals time in both the NBA and the NHL. Baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Gonzaga right now, their odds to win the 2025 national championship are at plus 2,000. If you are a big Ismaila Diagne fan and you think that's the missing piece, that's what we need, then what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and make sure your first bet is an automatic W. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, 2 more questions here to close out Mailbag Monday. Like I said, some of the questions got pushed to later in the week. We will talk about them at that point. But right now, 2 more questions. This next one comes from Grand Chef Otto on Discord, who says, it's track and field national championship week. Which current or former Zag do you think could run the fastest 100-meter sprint? I think the answer has to be Dimitri Goodson. And I thought about this for a while, and I put some honorable mentions on there, which we can talk about. But Meach was such a high-level athlete. Point guard for Gonzaga in the mid-2000s. I think it was there 2007, 2009. I think through 2010, excuse me. Went to Baylor, played cornerback for Baylor, got drafted in the NFL by the Green Bay Packers, played a few seasons as a special teamer, backup, secondary option for the Green Bay Packers. He's now currently a scout for the Green Bay Packers. Very interesting, very fascinating career for Dimitri Goodson. But this man was an incredible athlete. Frankly, not a great basketball player. Among the starting point guards in Gonzaga basketball history, dating all the way back to Matt Santangelo and Mark Few's first years, all the way till now, I think it's reasonable to say that Dimitri Goodson might be at the bottom of the list of starting point guards in Gonzaga basketball history. That's not as much a knock on him as more of a, hey, it's been an incredible run of starting point guards for the Gonzaga Bulldogs, but Meach was an elite athlete. And if you just put him on a 100-meter sprint and let him go to work, I think he would beat everybody who has played at Gonzaga basketball over the last 25 years. Other options, Rasir Bolton, that dude could fly up and down the floor. And I think he would absolutely give Meach a run for his money. Ryan Woolridge, one-year wonder for Gonzaga, never got to participate in the tournament just because the COVID year canceled. The 1 year he had that opportunity to be in the big dance, he was an elite athlete. I would throw Ryan Nembhard in there as well. A couple of recent Gonzaga guards, Meach a little bit from an older school era, but still all guys that flew up and down the floor, and I think would be the top options in Gonzaga basketball history. But if I'm picking one, got to go Meach. Final question of the show, another one from Discord. As a reminder that you can find the Discord channel. The link is in the show notes. Click there. Come hang out. We're talking Zag basketball 24/7. It's a great place to get those mailbag questions answered. This one comes from Spicy Lord Wade on Discord, who says, in the spirit of the Olympics, if Zag Nation was represented in the Olympics, who would you choose to compete in a few different sports? Few, obviously, are pickleball champion. Yep, clearly Mark Few is representing the staff and all of Gonzaga Nation for the pickleball event. He's a diehard pickleball player. It's fishing, pickleball, basketball, and he's very good at coaching basketball. So imagine what he can do with fishing and pickleball up at the top there. Yeah, I picked a handful of different sports here. Picked some winter sports, picked some summer sports, picked the most reasonable one here first, 3-on-3. I didn't pick a full Gonzaga basketball roster for an Olympic team, but for 3-on-3, give me Chet, Adam Morrison, Jalen Suggs. Morrison is an elite three-point shooter. He's a bit weak defensively, but you make up for that with Chet and Suggs, getting those two guys playing together, doing some ball screen actions. My goodness, that team would be unstoppable. Figure skating, give me Drew Timme. That man has impeccable footwork. His ability to move on the block was a thing of beauty, and I would absolutely love to see that man trying out some figure skating. So let's get it done. Get it done for Drew Timme here. Ski jump, give me Jeremy Pargo. I just recently watched the movie Eddie the Eagle. Absolutely love that movie, by the way. Fantastic sports movie. If you haven't seen it, it's about ski jumping, which is where they basically just fly off a cliff as far as they possibly can. Incredibly dangerous sport. Give me Pargo because that man was fearless. Absolutely fearless for the Zags. I think he'd be the one person brave enough to take on that sport. Long distance running, whether you want to look at 1,600 meter or half marathon or whatever it may be, give me Andrew Nembhard. This guy seems to be an Energizer bunny. He never wore down. I have such vivid memories of the Memphis game in the NCAA tournament in 2022, where Drew Timme really took over to start the second half. But Nembhard, in a game where Memphis has so many athletes and so much pressure and intensity, Nembhard just wore everybody down and was still getting out in transition, still moving with the basketball fluidly. He is a very, very, very high-level athlete and a guy who has a ton of endurance and I think could do those kinds of events. And then the high jump, give me Ira Brown. Give me Ira Brown here for the high jump, an absolute freak athlete, high-level jumper, a guy who played professionally for decades in Japan, represented them at the 3-on-3 games recently, was a former professional baseball player. Ira Brown and Dimitri Goodson have had two of the most fascinating careers in Gonzaga basketball history. And if we're just talking full-on jumping verticality ability, definitely give me Ira Brown for that one. It's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners. Shout out to those of you hanging out on the Discord channel as well. Once again, you can join the Discord channel for free. The link is in the show notes. We'll be back later this week. We're going to continue to keep you up to date on Ismaila Diagne coming to campus, what that means for the Zags. We're going to take a full look at the 13-man roster and what it looks like going forward. We'll talk about the private equity in college basketball, what that means for the Big 12, the naming rights there. We've talked about some of those other mailbag questions. We'll get into Anton Watson and his NBA draft profile, all that stuff coming up here this week here on Locked On Zags. So don't go anywhere. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.